What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? So today we're going to be talking with Erica. She recently was on Modern Day Debate debating Kent Hovind. We're going to be talking with her today about creationism, how she kind of got into debunking the creationist argument in general. So you want to say hi there, Erica?
Hey everybody, glad to be here. Ready to have some fun.
Yeah. All right, so if you guys are interested in this, then please stay tuned. Right, so Erica, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Like I said, I'm getting over the holiday high. Glad to see all my relatives get out of here. So
awesome.
Ready to rested and ready to go.
So I want to start off with commending you for your performance during the Kent Hovind debate because it was a very good debate, and I think that you really brought it to him as far as the science goes and explaining all those scientific concepts to him pretty well. And the only thing that he really had to fall back on was God. It is essentially, I feel like, is what his argument boils down to. So I'm kind of curious, how do you feel about the debate?
I mean, I had a great time. It was super frustrating at the same time, though, because, Kent runs off of a script. I watched a lot of his videos, a lot of his debates, especially on Modern Day Debate prior. But like I said, I could have watched one and gotten the same effect, because it's the same points over and over and over again. He's corrected on something, he still uses it in the next debate. I don't really understand, but I guess to change the script would be to admit that he was in error, and God forbid that his kind of followers see that. But yeah, I thought it went really well. I wish that I would have gotten an answer to some of my questions, but it didn't really hash out that way, did it?
No, not really. But I mean, like you said, I mean, he's pretty good at dodging questions and stuff. So it doesn't really surprise me that he didn't answer any kind of questions. But I mean, creationism in general can't really provide an explanation for anything.
Oh, no. You're dead right, because the thing is that their whole spiel is look at this evidence that debunks the evolutionist theory, but then they have no model to fall back on their own. There is no model for creationism, and there certainly isn't a testable one, which is vital for any scientific hypothesis.
Right. Now I'm wondering, what's your background with religion and I guess creationism specifically?
Oh, yeah. I'm not a fan of creationism. I was raised, my parents are both non-denominational. Both of them accept evolution, but aren't really, they're not very gung-ho about it either way. So they thought the religion thing was much more important, sent me to a Christian elementary school and a Christian middle school, where we had an entire course on how evolution was bunk, and it was guised as other religions are bunk kind of thing, but they covered naturalism as if it's some kind of faith-based belief. And when I reached high school, I went to a public high school, and when I got my hands on a legitimate biology textbook, I was like, hold up, I just got fed a whole lot of lies. The specific one that I remember was they were like, Homo habilis, it's the fossil that connects the Australopithecines, the really ape-like mosaics, to modern genus Homo, doesn't exist. And I was like, wait a second, this was found in 1955. So why wasn't it mentioned? There's no excuse. They just straight up lie by omission. And I thought that was very not forthcoming, and it really put a sour taste in my mouth for the whole creationism deal. So yeah, I'm not a big fan, and I was more and more encouraged to look into biology, and I ended up studying a lot of evolutionary biology, anthropology stuff in my undergrad. Loved it, and I'm a big primate fan, so now I'm studying those.
Awesome. Now, I'm kind of curious what your current religious affiliation is, because a lot of times, especially with the Kent Hovind ilk, they like to frame it as a faith-based position or an anti-God sort of idea, evolution, that is. And so I'm kind of curious, what is your own position on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually kind of in a weird place right now. I would say that I still maintain my faith, but I'm very much a read things allegorically as far as the Bible goes. I think you can get some good messages out of it. I think you can get some really bad messages out of it too, and I think a lot of people do. But yeah, I would say that I'm kind of on the brink of two positions as of right now. I think that it's a load of trash that you can not accept evolution and be Christian or Muslim or any religion that you want, because these two things I don't think are incompatible. And certainly the majority of the United States, which is the home of creationist ilk, doesn't find that to be the case either. Francis Collins, I mentioned earlier, Theodosius Dobzhansky, both Christians. Henry Baker, I think, Pentecostal preacher, right? And the dude was like the dinosaur guru for a long time, except 65 million years, all that good stuff. So no, I think that spinning that tale is partially how they keep the masses in this us versus them mentality.
Oh yeah, definitely they do. Now I'm kind of curious, how did you get to that position? Was it like evolution and finding that out that kind of got you to the position that you're kind of teetering between 2 points? Or?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. I think that's a great question, but as I've read before, a lot of it comes from just reading the Bible itself and realizing that a lot of this is sort of a fantastic version of a chronological history. And when I say fantastic, I mean sort of hyperbolic. So and there's just so much of it that's like drawing from other ancient Near Eastern traditions, Epic of Gilgamesh and the Babylonian creation story and all of these different things that you kind of read that and you're like, well, why are there so many different interpretations of this? Why does everybody think they're right? And then when you look a little bit into like the psychological aspect of tribalism and of course the evolutionary aspect of us as the curious primate, constantly trying to explain the world around us, you kind of start to think, well, what does separate this particular religion from the other ones? You know, I mean, my faith pretty much exclusively comes from anecdotal experiences, which are like the worst kind of evidence that there is out there. I'll be the first one to admit that, you know. But, you know, I do get a lot of comfort out of it. And I think as long as individuals don't bring their faith into kind of the functioning world and kind of push it on other people and use it to stifle progress, I think that there's not really a problem. The issue is that's creationist bread and butter.
Yeah, it really is, because you got people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind that oftentimes say that evolutionists like to push their religion on children and everything like that. So, I mean, what do you think about their sort of alarmist rhetoric centered around like evolution and the need for teaching creationism alongside evolution?
Oh man, it's just a rallying cry, right? Like it's this dog whistle that they're trying to grasp at something to say, to link to atheism and basically have these two conjoined in an aspect that it's like, oh, if we can prove evolution wrong, then we can prove atheism wrong. And this whole alarmist, as you mentioned, perspective, it's old bunk. You know, I mean, and the irony is that, and I certainly can appreciate this, is Ken Ham likes to say, oh, yeah, you know, the evolutionists treat kids like they're just an animal. And I want to be like, yeah, but you guys teach that humans are inherently flawed and that there's no way out of that. You know, I mean, it's stones and glass houses as far as I'm concerned. Plus, I don't think there's anything wrong with being an animal. I think it's awesome.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's really no different than the other, you know, forms of life that we find here, except that we're, you know, self-aware. We have different mechanisms and everything like that. But I mean, to treat ourselves like we're specially created, I feel is like very arrogant.
Oh, so arrogant. And, you know, like I said, my research right now is on primates. I'm doing a master's of research. So I've read probably several hundred papers just on primates and all of their little quirks and things like that. And there's so little that separates us from, especially genus Pan, the bonobos and the chimpanzees, because they are self-aware. They pass the mirror test. You know, they're compassionate, they're cooperative, they're warlike, they're vindictive. You know, they're all of the things that we are, except we've dialed it up to 11. So I think you're right, and the more that we discover about primates in general, the smaller that gap gets between us and them.
Right, I completely agree. Now, going back to when you were, making that transition out of your sort of creationist teachings to, finding that biology book and all that, I'm wondering, after that point, like, was there anything that continued to push you that way, just continuing to learn, or was there anything else that kind of ushered you in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, it was going to university and getting the opportunity to see basically these hypotheses and theories in action. You know, I mean, evolution is this simple idea, portrayed as, okay, it's change over time, like that's all fine and dandy. But when you see how the mechanisms work, and you see the lab experiments that have been done, and you can see the fossils all lined up in a row. I mean, one of the things in my debate with Kent that we talked about was how time is necessary for evolution. And I think that that's the case. The reason I'm comfortable laying that all on the line is because we know that the Earth is, I believe it's 4.8 now, billion years old, because of radiometric dating, which is just a law of physics, right? Like there is no, it's immutable as far as I know, especially with the geologic elements. So when you combine all of the evolution that we see in real time, these small incremental changes with massive amounts of time, it becomes not just probable, but inevitable.
I agree, because I mean, if you just consider how much things change even on a small scale, I mean, if you extrapolate that out, you get massive changes. I always liken it to going to the grocery store for a small grocery trip and getting a lot of small things, and then it turns into a huge grocery trip. Like it basically changes, which leads into another thing that people like Kent Hovind don't understand, and that's the law of monophyly, which I remember you distinctly bringing up. And he still does not understand that, like, just because it looks morphologically different doesn't mean that it's totally shifted clades. And I doubt that he even understands what a clade is.
Well, and that's, I've seen all different perspectives on, like, is Kent sincere in his position, right? Like, is it possible that he's genuinely been explained this so many times and he still doesn't get it? I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, talking to him, he seems sincere, but knowing how many previous debates that the concept of the law of monophyly has been explained to him, and he's still spouting the pine trees and whales thing or the pineapples and dogs thing, because his only hope with that is, and you notice this with creationists in general, but very much so with Kent, I think, is that he relies on this appeal to absurdity, right? Where it's like, pick two things that seem so different, and then say, oh, well, how is it possible that they have a common ancestor? And it's like, well, Kent, you got to take these small steps and then now he's gotten this thing where he's been explained it so many times, he corrects himself at the beginning, and he'll say, well, I know you're going to say they're eukaryotes. Yes, Kent, that's the point. They were all eukaryotes if you take it far enough back. I mean, it's this branching bush-like system, not a pineapple is going to turn into a dog. You're not going to have a pineapple produce a non-pineapple or a dog produce a non-dog. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But he insists every time on painting, the theory of evolution and all its sort of adjacent fields as saying things that they don't say. And it gets very tiresome to kind of correct him on that. And then he'll say he hasn't been corrected. He's just right. And you're like, okay, I wasn't aware that it was you back in the 1800s co-founding this theory, with Darwin and Wallace. But whatever.
Yeah. How do you feel about creationists misrepresenting like different scientific figures like Darwin and all everybody in the field of evolutionary biology, because a lot of times, like for instance, there's Frank Turek out there, which I don't know if you've seen any of his stuff. He loves the Darwin's doubt thing. Yeah. And he's terribly misleading in Darwin's doubt, because he only focuses on one particular portion of that. And I'm just kind of, what's your take on the whole Frank Turek Darwin's doubt argument?
Well, I think that creationists, right, there's this weird dichotomy where it's like they hate appeals to authority when you're like, hey, the entire scientific community accepts evolutionary theory, but then they love them when they have a single scientist that they can turn and point and say, see, this guy's got a degree and he's on my side. I mean, the same thing is true with Nathaniel Jeanson and his Replacing Darwin book. But what they miss, too, is that, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure Michael Behe, the author of Darwin's Doubt, and I think also The Signature in the Cell, or that might be Meyer. They're both in the intelligent design community. Someone can correct me in the comments. But both of them accept that the Earth is very ancient. They just believe that God sort of had a hand in things, and they either take the theistic evolution approach or like this idea of progressive creation, one of which there's no evidence for, and the other of which is unfalsifiable. So I'm with you. I hate this misrepresentation. Another thing, too, is where I thought you were going with that is the whole, social Darwinism as this aspect of evolution, or that Darwin was this evil figure. Darwin's wife was like as religious as you could get, and he loved her with all his heart. Darwin was not this like anti-theist trying to come out here and wrench science from the masses of pious believers. That's not how he rolled. He was just a curious guy who had the opportunity to go on a big cruise. And then he noticed like the most important theory in biology almost by chance.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, they always leave out the little minute details about, about people and just things in general concerning evolution. For your Kent Hovind debate, did you set yourself up to sort of visually mock him?
Not intentionally, but honestly, I found myself over and over again when I was watching his debates. Someone would present this excellent example of speciation in the lab, or with the Italian wall lizards, or whatever, the New York swallows, the whale, and he would go, yes, but they're still whales, they're still flies, they're still this, they're still that. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like I just was screaming at my phone. I was like, yes, Kent, we know that they're still the thing that they were. That's called evolution. So when I was writing my slides, I was getting so frustrated. I was like, yes, we know they're still flies. In quotation marks, because I was like, I want him to know that it's like, Kent, yes, I do understand what you're saying. The problem isn't that I'm not getting it, or that the people that you're talking to aren't getting it. You're the one who's misrepresenting it. And perhaps that is by accident. Far be it from me to try and put myself in the mind of the Kent Hovind. But, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around that he's still missing some of this.
Well, yeah, it is. But I can't get over how the way that the debate was visually framed was Kent had his monitor up, and then you also having your monitor up displaying your slides. And I really thought that you were just like, all right, Kent, you're going to have slides? Boop, I've got slides too, motherfucker.
I wanted to get one of those like little brontosaur skeletons, or like some closed clams or something, so that when he brings out the clams, I'm like, oh yeah, Kent, you got a clam? How about these clams? They're also closed. Want to know why? It's called gravity. I mean, this guy, but yes, I was like, I guess it was a little passive aggressive, because I was like, yeah, I want to have my slides, but I want to be able to gesture that to them too, and he does that thing where it's like when you're talking, he's flipping through his slides, getting ready for his response.
Yeah.
And that just kills me, because to me, it feels like he's not listening, and And that's almost like the greatest insult. Like you come on there to talk with someone else and he's like flipping through his slides, pulling up a picture of a Cadillac for showing intelligent design. And you're like, I think at one point I was like, yes, Kent, I see you're pulling up the Cadillac. Cars don't have sex. They can't reproduce by themselves. Yes, they require an intelligent designer. Ford signs their cars on the side. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I roll my eyes so hard whenever I hear creationists be like, well, Cadillacs are designed because they're complex, therefore life has to be designed because it's complex. It's like, we don't have a natural process for like cars to produce each other or produce naturally, and they can never seem to get over that particular hump. The whole idea that you've got to have a natural process behind it, and they're two totally different things. Is there any one particular argument that you find is particularly I guess annoying to you?
Oh my God! I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about all the arguments that I find hollow, but honestly, it's the live tissue and the soft tissue in the dinosaur bones. Have you heard that one?
Mm-hmm.
That one kills me, especially because the discoverer of those bones, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she hates it just as much. She hates this misrepresentation of her research, and it's like they get this cursory idea of what's going on. You can put this across the board with creationists in general. But cursory knowledge of what's going on, extrapolate it to the conclusion that they need. I mean, it blows my mind. That one, I hate the one with radiometric dating where they're like, oh, look at this time that they dated, this cow bone that had been in like a volcanic eruption with carbon dating, and it showed this wild date even though it had died 2 days ago. And they don't include the fact that these are novices trying to perform this. They're carbon dating something that hasn't been dead long enough to register an actual legitimate carbon date, or they're trying to carbon date things that can't be carbon dated because they're so old, there's no carbon left. They don't understand the difference between carbon dating and radiometric dating, and they extrapolate them upon themselves. It drives me crazy because I'm not a rock expert. I am not a geologist. But I make it my business to know enough about geology so that if someone brings up radiometric dating, I can be like, dude, that's literally just wrong. And I can send you 6 papers because I love literature. I love having the literature ready. So it's like, I can show you precisely why that's incorrect, but then they just switch to some different topic.
Yeah.
So those are the things that drive me the most crazy.
Well, and the thing that I've noticed that most creationists at least get to at some point with the radiometric dating argument is that it boils down to a special pleading argument, because they'll be like, well, things operated differently before then. And that's exactly what Kent Hovind, he delves into. Ultimately, when you get down to it, he just special pleads his way out of everything. Because if you bring up how there's not enough water on the earth to cover the entire earth with water in a flood, he'll just be like, well, sure, if you spread out the water thinly enough, then it'll cover the entire earth. And it's like, well, one, not exactly true. Two, I mean, the mountains, he has this strange notion that mountains were only so high, right? And that totally goes against everything that we know, about early Earth terrain and everything like that. So it's kind of crazy.
Well, and they love to use, I'm sure you've heard of how they appealed to Mount St. Helens and Engineers Canyon, and how this canyon was formed in a couple of hours, and they call it Mini Grand Canyon, so therefore it's equatable to the actual Grand Canyon. And they use phrases like the water cut through the rock, in 8 hours there was a canyon, except that it wasn't rock. It was soft mud and ash, right? Also, it doesn't look like the Grand Canyon. It's a small valley with almost these sloping sides. You don't get the jagged cuts that you get on the side of the Grand Canyon. It's one piece of strata, and it's made of nothing even remotely similar to rock. It's soft ash. You could probably go down there with your finger and, cut a little canyon if you wanted to. So it's misrepresentation all across the board. And the people who they're telling it to, and I know because I used to be that person, eat it right up. Because they're basically saying, oh, wow, look at all this science that supports my opinion, and And that sucks because, I used to bring this up in conversations that I have on the Debate Evolution subreddit. It's a fun subreddit. You should visit it. It's mostly just people who accept evolution, curb stomping newbies who come in there and ask the same questions we've heard hundreds of times before. But I used to work with a creationist at this vet clinic kind of near my house. I was just a veterinary. We were both veterinary assistants. And he was like coming in and like proselytizing all the time. And finally I was like, look, I accept evolution. Want to get coffee? Let's talk about it. And over the course of a year, we would get coffee like once a month and just talk about it. Bring our respective evidence to and fro. And honestly, the thing that got him that he could never really bring up an answer for was the problem with heat during the Noachian deluge, right? It's like you've got all these, they try to do these catastrophic plate tectonics. It's too hot. Everything in the water would die. Noah would burn to a crisp. That ark would catch on fire like a little piece of driftwood. But what caught me was how biologically inclined this guy was. He loved biology, and he was like basically shoehorned into accepting this idea that he was doing everything in his power to white knuckle grasp that and keep it and believe it. Even though everything was just point blank in his face saying, no, that's just not how reality works. And he was he was planning on being a veterinarian, but he gave it up to be a teacher because he felt that he was being called to kind of spread the message in the public schools. And that sucks because he would have been a really good veterinarian. He was a smart guy. He was just really, really kind of indoctrinated feels like a mean word to use because he's my friend and I like him. But that is kind of the case. And it sucks because I think about all the kids out there. I could have been one of them if I hadn't been exposed to the right material, I guess, the legitimate truth. If you're kept away from that long enough, it becomes a part of your identity. And then you do anything you can to hold on to it. That sucks. We're losing out on many great biologists because they're not allowed to explore and be curious. Sucks.
Oh, yeah, I totally empathize with that. But speaking of like how people have reacted to, you being pro-evolution or whatever, how like did you get any kind of pushback from any friends or anything like that? Yeah, I'm sorry. I honestly, you got to cut me off. I will monologue. But yeah, I mean, my dad, honestly, like, as I said, both my parents accept evolution now. And were all kind of have always been open to the idea. But for a long time, my dad was sort of the opinion, he's a doctor, he's a medical doctor. And he was always of the opinion where he was like, yeah, it could be, but I'm not really convinced. But maybe. That was kind of his thought process. And now we've sat down enough times. And for a long time, he was like, I feel like you're kind of leaning into this. This is like your religion, sort of. And I was like, no. Being passionate about something does not equate to it being a religion. I find it really interesting. And I really hate that I was kept from this fascinating branch of science for so long. But I'm just find it really interesting and I want to share it with you. And he was taking every time I would come up, for instance, that really cool 2019 cellularity paper earlier of the sort of proto-emergence of multicellularity thanks to predation. When I brought that up to him earlier this year, he was like, they're just trying to find more ways to keep God out of science. And I was like, Dad, that's not how any of this works, right? Like, we're searching for answers to really cool questions. And just because we found some way to, like, because the God of the gaps hypothesis is getting smaller and smaller, that doesn't mean you still can't be religious. I mean, do you honestly think that God is present in every chemical reaction that ever occurs? No, that would be ridiculous. You can hold the stance that as a religious person, that this is just another mechanism that has been set forth, but it does work independently. So why wouldn't? Well, but he's got this us versus them thing still kind of in the back of his head, I feel like. And he's softened now. I mean, he's pretty okay with it these days. And he's very accepting of the ancient earth and all of those things. But he really didn't like it at first because he thought it was this step on the branch to atheism, I guess, which I don't really get. I don't get that. I don't understand it either, because that's one thing that I've really noticed in any evolution versus creationism sort of conversation I get into, is that a lot of people think that evolution is like very anti-God and very, I guess, wanting to strip people of their religiosity. And it's like it's like a false dichotomy almost, because it's like either you believe in evolution or you believe in, special creation by God. And it's a very frustrating like barrier to have to traverse. Are there any like other, I guess, difficult barriers that you found like in talking with people that they have to get through, or you have to get through?
Oh, you mean, I guess, or do you mean me personally, like being so pro-evolution, or do you mean like arguments that I find hard to traverse?
Oh, well, I guess like arguments and talking with people, like what kind of barriers have you noticed like between you and creationists?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's this idea. I really do think that they think they're coming from a perspective of a divine thought process. Like they're basically saying, look, this is the Bible, this is God's word. You really think I'm going to take your word for it over God's? And then that's when I stop and I say, hold on, you're not talking about, God's word. You're talking about your interpretation of the Bible. Right. There's a very big difference. I mean, let's grant for a moment that it's all legit. Right. There's still hundreds of denominations. So who's right and who's wrong? I mean, it's a very vague book in a lot of ways. Reading it is kind of difficult because you'll come to a passage and you're like, I don't know what this means, because one, it was written 2,000 years ago, in a completely different language, and language is hard enough to translate, but culture is even harder. So to try to put it under a lens of like, and Kent does this all the time. He's like, well, the Bible was written for anybody to understand it. No, it wasn't. It's a holy book. It wasn't meant for the longest. We live in a very unique era where it's like everybody can go out and buy a copy of it. It wasn't always like that, so it was meant for people who had the training to understand it. It's not that simple. So I think that's like the first barrier you have to overcome when you're talking with a creationist, is to basically say, no, you're not talking about God's word versus man's word. You're talking about your interpretation of God's word versus conventional science, which really kind of frames the argument and the conversation in a much more amicable manner, I think, because they basically pause and they're like, well, then it becomes sort of a theological argument. Well, this is why I know what God's saying, what he says. And then you're like, okay, well, that too is an opinion, because I think you're interpreting it wrong. So yeah, I think that can be something that's kind of difficult. My advice to people who talk to creationists is be really patient, especially if they're your friend, and don't frame it, even if it may feel like you're coming from a position of more information versus less. And if only they were exposed to the correct information, they'll get there, because you still got to overcome so many different bridges of their history with this thought process. I mean, they've been taught that it really is, accept it this way or you're going to hell. So you almost have to start with the perspective that's like, no, you're going to be okay. Like, accepting change over time is not going to damn you to hell. I promise. I feel comfortable saying that. So yeah, that's kind of where I would come from with that. That would be my advice.
Well, I'm wondering, what's your opinion on the whole idea that the Genesis and the entire Bible is like scientifically accurate?
Oh, completely false. Absolutely no, nothing. These are people who didn't understand that the sky was not a solid object. Rakia means like solid and malleable. That's the Hebrew word for the firmament, right? The sky, the waters above, the boundary between us and the waters above. And you can't blame them for that. I mean, if people came from 2,000 years in the future and got down on us for using chemotherapy, because how could we be so stupid? There's a better way of getting rid of cancer. We'd be like, well, how could we know that? We didn't have the information. So yeah, I mean, there's so much, because that's not the purpose of the Bible, to be a science book. Otherwise, it's really a cursory scientific knowledge, and that there is none. I think one of the things that's used a lot is the stick, and for the striped stick, we'll wave that in front of a calf or cow, and they'll bear a striped calf. That's not genetics. That's magic, and there's a lot of magic in the Bible, because it's a religious text. Show me a religious text that doesn't have magic in it. A lot of it is hyperbolic too. I mean, I think that there's at least a decent amount of evidence that there was at least a large localized flood at some point in sort of the Mesopotamian area. There's not any evidence for a global flood, I'll tell you that. But people, we're storytellers, as by our very nature, we like to tell stories. So when something happens to a tribe of people, we sort of frame it in this way that it's going to teach a lesson and be preserved. So a swelling of the Nile that was really bad one year, this bad inundation of the Nile, could suddenly become a global flood story. So no, I don't think the Bible's scientific really in the slightest. I don't think it's meant to be. And I think that people who do think that it is, and that I also don't think that it's inerrant, which is not something that many Christians jive with. I think the message is meant to be inerrant, right? Like this whole concept of how you're saved, right? But as far as the actions that are done in it, and the lessons that it's trying to teach, and the history itself and the way that it conveys science, I don't think so. And I don't think that was ever its intention.
Now, do you think that should cause anybody to waver in their faith, or what kind of effect do you think that should have on a person when considering their faith?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. I think spirituality is something that's very personal. I don't tend to bring up my sort of theological position on my channel, just because I don't find it very relevant to what I try to talk about, which is I just like science. And I think evolution is really cool, and so is paleontology. But I think that because spirituality is indeed something that is relevant to the individual and not really anybody else, it depends on the person. I mean, if your faith is contingent on the Bible being accurate in every sense of the word, you're going to have a hard time, because it's not. So I don't know. I think it's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer. I think everybody kind of is trying to make it through life and feel as little depressed as possible. If you get a lot out of your faith, awesome. Don't put it in my schools, but awesome.
I completely agree with that sentiment. Keeping it out of schools, and that it's a very personal thing. And just to clarify, I don't think that the Bible being scientifically inaccurate should make anybody's faith waver, but I do think that it should make them reconsider like the inerrancy thing, as well as taking the Bible as literal history. I think that people are perfectly fine to take the theological books that they hold dear as theological books. I'm perfectly fine with that. And I agree very much with you over the idea that, that you can have, your faith, and that science really shouldn't mix as far as like that goes in that particular context. Like, I don't think that just because science proves something is wrong about the Bible, or something that the Bible claims, I don't think that should, cause people to not believe or anything like that. So the reason why I bring it up is because a lot of the creationist apologists love to attach science and religion together or apart, depending on which angle they come at it. So I really appreciated your input on that particular thing.
And I wish I could give a better answer. I mean, you're getting into a lot of stuff that's like, you get the best minds on it. Better people than I have tried to answer that question. But I think too, you got to keep in mind, like, even the best scientists, evolutionary biologists, even that are religious, they kind of find a meta confirmation of their faith in nature, but they don't impose them on one another.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing, is not imposing it on other people. That's the thing that I take the most offense with, and that's what I kind of handle here on my channel, is when people try to push things on other people, or do that kind of thing. But now I'm wondering, what what motivated you to start making videos on YouTube as far as like the evolution topic or the creationism topic?
With evolution, I'm just really passionate about it, and I think it's really interesting. And I find it very romantic, like the idea of human evolution. That in sort of a whimsical sense, it's this fascinating tale of sort of the hero's journey. It's not like that in reality at all. There's a lot more chance and just natural selection involved. But I think painting it in a light sort of like that can get a lot of people interested in it. And the more people that are interested in science and the story of our own species, in my opinion, the better, because evolutionary theory impacts everything from how we grow our food to how we come up with cures to diseases. As for creationism, I started making videos about creation because I was pissed off. I was rooting around in my basement, and I was finding these old books that had been, I'd accidentally sort of nicked from my library, my middle school library. And I'm going through them and I'm thinking, these are for kids. And this is just not true. It's just non-truths. It's a book of non-truths for children. And I take great offense to that. As an individual, I really hate when we lie to kids, especially when it has to do with educational stances that are going to impact perhaps the rest of their lives. So I just kind of started thinking about it from a perspective of, well, I really wish that there had been more resources when I was trying to figure things out. And there are some awesome ones on YouTube now. I thought I might as well contribute what I can.
No, I definitely think that you should, because I don't know if you've noticed, but our motto here is to stand up and use your voice. And I really want to highlight creators that are doing that. And that's what motivated me to get you to, on this interview today, is because I really appreciate new creators coming out and using their voice and relaying good information, because I've watched some of your videos and they're very well produced, and I love the information contained in them. And I think that everybody should go and subscribe to you right now, which brings me to which brings me to my next question. How did you come up with the name Gutsick Gibbon?
Oh, I don't know. I love gibbons. They're one of my favorite primates. They're very awkwardly shaped, and I kind of empathize with them. I'm a very long-limbed person, and I have kind of a short torso. And so I love gibbons. I think they're really cool. As for Gutsick, I love doodling, and this is like the lamest story ever. But one time I just drew this gibbon, kind of had like an upset stomach, and it was drinking some tea, like some calming tea. And I was like, oh, like it's a little Gutsick gibbon. He's got a stomach ache. And I was like, this is really lame. I'm going to make it my handle. So I've now kind of in retrospect, now that I'm for my research project for my master's, I'm going to Malaysia in March to kind of do my data collection on pig-tailed macaques. So now I'm kind of like, well, maybe I should have done something with macaques, considering I'm going to know a lot more about them than gibbons. But man, those things are just so damn cute. Like they're so awesome. They're my favorite primates. I'm biased. I can't help it.
Well, now, how did you get to be on the modern day debate, like against Kent Hovind? Because I don't know if you've debated people before, but Kent Hovind seems to be like a pretty big contender to take on right out the gate.
Well, honestly, I got into modern day debate kind of by accident. They started showing up on my recommended feed. And I was because I watched a lot of Aaron Ra's debates, and man, that guy's a heavy hitter. Like he knows his stuff. And I was like, well, I started seeing this stuff on Modern Day Debate, and then I saw how Kent was basically sending this open to anybody, where he was like, I'll debate anyone and anybody about anything with half my brain tied behind my back. And I was like, well, no one's really debated him on human evolution except for the late great Bill Ludlow. And I loved his debate with Kent, and I thought, well, and actually, I was supposed to be on Bill's show about a month before he passed, and I was corresponding with him via email. And then when the email stopped, I got kind of concerned, and then I found out that he'd passed away. And so I kind of thought, well, how better to kind of get into the debate scene and honor Bill Ludlow than to just debate Kent Hovind. So I sent a message to Kent's secretary, Rhonda, at bigdino.com. And I was like, hey, Rhonda, I don't know if Kent would be interested. I'm a really small YouTuber, but I've got pretty good credentials for human evolution. I'll take Kent on if he wants to. We can go on Modern Day Debate. And she was like, let's do it. And so that's really how it happened. Fortunately, I fight a lot with my family, so I've got a lot of debate experience in that aspect. We have a good relationship, but we're one of those families that fights a lot and then gets over it pretty fast. So I kind of just went with that and debated Kent, and now I'm supposed to debate Standing for Truth here soon. I think January the 7th on human evolution as well. And I know he's going to bring John Sanford, and Nathaniel Jeanson to the scene, because that's what he does. And it should be fun. I'm kind of glad to be involved in the debate community now. I find it a good time for everybody, hopefully educational, very bad for my blood pressure, but enjoyable nonetheless.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I've debated Standing for Truth before, too. Of course, I lost to him as well, according to Standing for Truth. All of these, you just got to wait for everybody to assume that you've lost that are on their side, because the debates are not for the diehards that are on either side, but more for the people that are, listening in to hear both sides of the argument.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And, there are so many awesome heavy hitters in favor of evolution who are, and I think we need this kind of personality, but they're very aggressive. And so my stance is I try to be a bit more amicable because I have been gifted with an incredible patience, I hope. I'm better at hiding my frustration, I think, than others, although they certainly have me trounced on general knowledge body, just because these guys have been doing it for so long. They're so good at it. But I kind of, I think you're right. I think you kind of have to go in knowing that the people who have already decided, and you're reaching out to people who, are kind of saying to themselves, well, what if I'm wrong about this particular topic? And then they get on YouTube and they're like, evolution debates, and then you might pop up and maybe you help them in some way. I've gotten a lot of emails and comments on my channel that were kind of along the lines of like, I'm a Kent supporter, but I thought you were really polite, so I subbed to you and I'm trying to be open-minded. And my response is always, glad to have you here. Shoot me an email if you want to talk about evolution. I will hopefully answer your questions to the best of my ability. That's all I can do. And I've gotten some nice conversations out of it. I don't know that I'm changing anybody's mind, but little baby steps, I think.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've always said is that you can't force somebody out of the fog that they're in, but you can be that voice of reason that's like sort of calling to them, so that whenever they are open to, listening, they can be the ones to lead themselves out, using your particular voice as like sort of a lighthouse almost.
Yeah, you're dead on, I think.
Yeah. But I really appreciate you joining me today. I hope that everybody will go and check out Gutsick Gibbon. I've got Erica linked down in the description. Subscribe. She's got a lot of great videos already on the channel. And apparently she's going to be debating a lot more, which I think is a really good thing. I think we need more people just like you, in the debate, I guess, online debate circuit discussing this topic. If I can offer one bit of advice.
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
Do not debate a guy named Skyout. I don't know if you've seen it. I've got like about an hour and a half conversation that I had with him on my channel. I don't know if you can really suffer through that, but it takes him 40 minutes to actually give me an example of evolution.
Oh my God. How'd you manage?
Well, I don't know. Just the entire time it was me, give me an example of evolution. And it was really weird because he keeps on inserting anthropology along with abiogenesis to describe evolution.
Oh my God.
It's weird. So if you want to have some brain damage, you can watch that if you want to. God. But I'm just saying, like, in your debate thing, if Skyout comes up, don't talk to him. At least that's my opinion. You can try if you want to, but it's going to be really tough getting through.
Yeah, I appreciate the advice. I'm new to the scene, so I need all the pointers I can get for sure.
All right. Well, like I said before, everybody should go subscribe to Gutsick Gibbon. Erica's linked down below. Leave all of the lovely comments, what you think, any advice that you might have for Erica or anybody that you might want to see her debate. So please go down there, let her know, and I guess we'll see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice.
Bye, guys.